Hello chess enthusiasts, my name is Miha and welcome to my Chess Realm YouTube channel. Norway Chess Championship is underway. We have 6 top grandmaster playing round robin tournament. So in the first round there should be 3 games, but Nepo had visa problems, so he will play his game on a free day. And let's take a look at a very interesting and instructive game from Arjan Tari, Norwegian grandmaster, and Richard Rapport, Hungarian grandmaster. In the game Arjan Tari had white pieces and he started with e4, e6, d4, d5, and we have French defense. Now knight to c3 and bishop to b4, and now the usual reply is e5, of course the most standard, but in the game white captures on d5, e-pawn recaptures, and now we have this delayed exchange variation. Bishop goes to d3, and knight to f6 development on a natural square, but black plays knight to e7. And now knight to f3, bishop to g4, pinning the knight, now h3, driving the bishop away, so bishop goes to h5, still keeping the pin, and now white castles king side, and knight from b goes to c6, targeting this pawn on d4. Of course, knight cannot protect it because he is pinned by the bishop. So white plays bishop to e2, I'm pinning the knight and also protecting pawn on d4. And now black castles king side, and now white plays knight to h4, hoping that black will grab bishop on e2, so white can recapture with knight. But black is on the move and senses his opportunity, so bishop first captures on c3. Well, of course, white has to recapture, or pawn on d4 falls. So b captures on c3, and now bishop captures on e2 and queen recaptures. And now let's take a look. Material is equal. White doesn't get bishop pair, but has double pawns along the c file and also 3 pawn island, so white's pawn structure is already worse than black. And of course black will definitely try with knight to c4. This is a very strong outpost for the knight because white's dark square bishop won't be able to drive him away, so black is already better from strategically point of view. Rook to e8 was played. Of course, if white makes a random move, then we have this discover attack on the queen and also double attack on the knight, so white has to remove the queen. Queen to f3 was played, and now queen to e7, bishop to d2, knight to a5, rook from a goes to e1, and now knight to c4, grabbing this c4 square as I was saying before, and now bishop goes back to c2. Now you can see this knight attacks all these squares, so white's dark square bishop is already limited in movement. With the correct pawn moves, black will be totally limit the movement of white's dark square bishop. So in the game black plays a5 and now queen to h5. And now black plays rook to a6, interesting move. Yes, you might wonder that black wants to double the rook along the file, but that's not exactly the case because white plays knight to f3, preparing to jump on g5. Well, from here white can attack h7 and also f7, so this would be very unpleasant. So first black drives away the queen with g6, queen goes to h4, knight to g5 is still valid. Well, of course black cannot simply play h5 because then after g4 white gets to destroy pawn structure around the king, and also bishop to g5 is also very unpleasant. So in the game black plays f6, preventing this knight to g5 jump, and of course pawn on f6 is protected by the rook, so now you see why white played rook to a6. Okay, so white plays rook to e2, preparing to double the rook along the e file. Black immediately reacts with knight to f5, attacking queen and also the rook, so white has no other options but to capture the rook with check. After queen recaptures, now we have queen to f4, eyeing this pawn on c7, so black defends with queen to d7, and now rook to e1. White finally takes over the file, and now black plays g5, attacking the queen. There is only one square left for the queen that is not attacked, so queen goes to g4, and now black plays rook to e6, attacking rook on e1. Well, of course, queen cannot capture knight on f5, because then we have rook to e1 with check. Now this bishop on c1 is totally limited in movement, because he cannot even go to f4, but maybe one of the interesting options here would be if white would sacrifice his bishop, for example, rook to e6, queen recaptures, and now bishop to g5. So f pawn recaptures, queen recaptures, is check, so white sacrifices bishop for 2 pawns. Now black has to be careful. For example, if king goes to f7, then queen to f4. Trying to get the third pawn, and also pinning knight on f5, threatening with g4. And of course, if black defends the check with queen to g6, then again queen to d8, check, and also attacking these 2 pawns. So here black would have to find the correct continuation with knight to g7, after queen to d8, then knight to e8, protecting this pawn on c7, but then knight to g5, attacking the queen. Well, queen has to protect his knight, so queen could only go to e1 with check, after king to h2, then knight to b6, finally protecting the bishop. So very complicated position. Computer still thinks black is better, but who knows what would happen in the game. Okay, so in the game white plays h4, trying to break this mini pawn chain to get his bishop mobile, and black captures rook on e1, knight recaptures, now queen to e6, attacking this knight on e1. Of course, white doesn't have time to capture pawn on g5, so knight goes to d3, and now queen to e4, literally forcing the exchange of queens. Of course, queen cannot simply run away, because this pawn on h4 is 3 times attacked. For example, after knight to h4, black is already better. Queen to h3 also doesn't help after the g3, pushing queen further back. So white has no other options but to capture queen on e4. Black recaptures, and now knight to c5. Now there are several pawns hanging here, and black has obviously evaluated that his pawn structure is better, and that he will try to use this in the endgame. So black captures pawn on h4. Now white has to decide which pawn to capture. There are 2 possibilities. Well, you can see that on the king side black has 4 pawns against 2 white pawns, so this is a big majority on the king side for black, so maybe the best option here would be simply capturing pawn on e4, reducing the pressure on the king side. White, however, saw the things differently and captures on b7. So black plays knight to f5, knight goes to c5, trying to grab this pawn also, so knight to e6 defending, and now g4. Now kings are coming into the game. The less pieces that are on the board, the more important the kings are. So first black plays king to f7, king to g2, king to g6, and now a4, blocking black's a pawn. And now black plays h5, attacking pawn on g4. So white has no other option but to capture after king recaptures. Now, of course, black wants to advance with his king, because now black already has 3 pawns versus 1, so this will be very difficult for white. Now king goes to g3, preventing this jump with king on g4. And now black plays f5, advancing with his pawn. Now this knight here on c5 was so far protecting this pawn on a4, but now white plays knight to e6. First of all, attacking pawn on c7. Well, this pawn is going to fall sooner or later, but more important, attacking this pawn on g5. Well, of course, if black tries to grab a pawn, then simply bishop to g5, and now bishop comes into the game. So black definitely has to prevent that. f4 was played, check. Well, of course, if king goes, for example, back to h2, then king 2 goes to g4. Even if knight captures, then king to f2. Even if black protects this pawn on f2, then king to d2, and soon it will be all over. So in the game, white finally brings this dark square bishop into the game. Bishop to f4 was played, sacrificing bishop for 2 pawns, but this is a tricky one. If black captures immediately, then after king recaptures, now black has only 3 pawns and white has 5, so it would be very difficult to hold on onto this pawn, since white king is already in the game while black king is on the corner of the board. So I don't know. Maybe after knight to b6, then knight captures on c7, even if knight recaptures on a4. Then we have this king to e5, attacking the only defender of pawn on e4. So I don't know, after maybe knight to c4, then king captures. Even if black clears the way for his knight, then knight to a6, a4, and knight to b4, stopping this pawn here on a2, and black gets additional 4 pawns, so 4 pawns, or I should say 3 pawns versus knight. It's not very likely that black would be able to convert this advantage. Okay, so in the game, in this position, black plays an intermediate move for Zwischenzug, knight to f5. Of course, the idea is to drive the king away from the center, and so king goes to h3, and now black captures on f4. Again, knight on e6 has 2 ways of capturing the pawns. Well, of course, if knight captures on c7, then we have f3, literally blocking white king away from the action. So I don't know, then e3 is a real threat. After maybe knight to e5, then knight to e2, maybe king to h2, and then we have this e3. Even if black captures, knight recaptures, pawn recaptures, then king to g4, and there is nothing that can stop this pawn from promoting. Okay, in the game, white has decided correctly. White grabs the pawn on f4, check, king goes to h6, and now knight to e6, trying to grab this pawn also. So now black plays knight to e7. Now this is a very complicated position. Of course, black can capture pawn on c7 immediately, but it would be far better if white would play king to g4, getting the queen into the action. Well, white has a simple plan. Of course, knight to d5. First of all, grabbing pawn on c3, and then also pawn on a4. But still, after maybe king to f5, if knight captures, then we have this d5. If black captures, then king to e4. So black king is stuck at the end of the boards, while white king is in the game. So this would be difficult for black to hold on onto his 2 pawns. Even with the knight up, this would probably end up in a draw. Okay, so in the game, black preferred to capture the pawn, so knight to c7 was played. Of course, black is protecting this d5 square, so knight now cannot capture to endanger pawn on c3. And now black king goes into the action, king to g5, king to g2, king to g4, king to f1, king to f3, and king to e1. And now black gives up on this d5 square, so knight to c8 was played. Of course, the idea b6, and then grabbing this pawn on a4. So now knight doesn't have to worry about this d5 square anymore, so knight goes to e6, knight to b6, and now knight to g5 check, king to f4, knight to e6 check, now king goes to g4, and now knight to c5. And now this knight defends pawn on a4 and also attacking black pawn on e4, so black plays king to f3, protecting. Now there aren't many moves that white can play. If white removes knight from c5, then pawn on a4 falls. Where if white plays king to f1, for example, then we have this knight to e4. After that, this pawn falls, and it's more or less all over. In the game, white played knight to b3, then black captures on a4, and now we have this deep d5 pawn push, knight to b6 attacking. Now pawn goes to d6, and now a4, knight to e4 check, king goes to f4, knight goes to b5, and now we have a simple tactic motive called deflection. Knight captures pawn on d6, white recaptures, and now a3, and black only needs 2 moves to promote to queen. Knight cannot stop it, king also, and therefore in this position Arian Tari resigned the game. So I hope you like this game and that you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.